Hey everyone, welcome back to Church Planting Basics. Lee Stevenson here, and excited to be able to talk with you today specifically about some different models that exist when it comes to church planting. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list, but I do want to walk through some of the basic models that seem to be used around the United States. I'm going to talk a little bit about the strengths, the weaknesses, what it takes in order to plant, from a personality standpoint, maybe a certain model. And then we're going to talk about, once you have defined that model, how do you then move into a community and begin the basics of networking? So I'm going to walk you through 10 rules to networking. And then lastly, we're going to finish off this session, talk a little bit about the different hats that a church planter has to be willing to wear as well. So let's move on to models. So here's several different models that exist when it comes to church planting or getting a brand new church up and going. I'm going to start at the top here talking about the pioneer or parachute type of church planter. This is a church planter that really feels called to a specific location or specific group of people that they most likely have no previous relational connections. They have no networks already established in that community, but they just know there's a need. And somehow God has connected their heart to that specific need. And so they decide to jump into that community. In other words, they're parachuting from outside, landing in the community, and they have to begin every single layer of establishing that new church from scratch. Now, the leadership gifts that are going to really be required and leaned upon in order to make this go well is you've got to be a natural entrepreneur. And obviously, you have to be a person of great faith. If you don't have a background of starting a lot of different things from scratch and seeing that actually be productive, I would recommend this would not be the model that you would want to go after. When it comes to models, this may be the most difficult model, and sometimes it's worth hitting the pause button for a couple years to slowly build that network in that community, maybe even working an outside job outside the church in order to establish those relationships that would necessarily move towards building a launch team and then obviously establishing that church. Both of our church plants that we did somewhat operated this way, but we took a number of years. So when we planted in Arizona, we were about 5 years on the ground before we actually launched the church plant. And then when we came to Orlando, we were on the ground here 3 years before we launched that church. Both communities we stepped into really didn't know anybody, but just knew that we felt like God was calling us to get something going there. The second would be what we would establish as a branching type of plant, where you have a parent church and that parent church is excited about supporting you and the idea of getting a new church started. And so most likely in a branching setting, they've got a core group of people that they're willing to send with you to help establish that new church. The gift mix that you're going to have to rely on in order to do this well is you really got to be a natural facilitator. And then obviously you have to have established credibility with that parent church where there's a high level of trust both ways. And I would also caution the parent church, like they've got to be willing to step out of the leadership role and give you the space to run and to lead, recognizing most likely and probably should lead and create and structure maybe a little bit differently than how that parent church did. Usually this works well when you have a group of people that are looking at maybe moving 25, 30 miles outside of where that parent church. You want to be just far enough that when things get difficult, that group of people that came with you to help establish that church don't just run back to the parent church. And so typically that maybe around 30-minute drive mark kind of establishes that as well. The third is what we would call adopting. And this is where there's a core group of people maybe already meeting, kind of a small group of people meeting in a community, praying that they have the passion to start a new church, but they're just praying that God would bring them the leader in order to be able to do this. And so there are moments where a leader will step into that small group that's already established. And the gift mix is they've got to be a natural developer, but they're going to have to really rely on wisdom because there may be already established cultural components that small group is operating by, and they've got to be able to figure that out and figure out how do we navigate that, and then how do we develop the team that's already established there. I mean, one of the situations that we actually looked at years ago was the opportunity to go plant in a smaller town in California, where there was actually a group of people, about 25 people, that really felt like God was calling them to plant a church and help start a church, but they were looking for that leader that could come and do that. And we got a phone call going, hey, would you be interested in this? We chose not to take that because we just felt like it was a different model than what we were wired to, and it would have caused us in that season to compromise some of the vision components that God had placed in our heart. The fourth is what I would dub co-parenting. A co-parenting approach is where you have cooperation that is taking place between multiple churches to establish a new work. So it may be two rural community churches have a heart and passion to plant a brand new church in an adjacent rural community, and they recognize maybe we don't have all the resources on our own, but if we partnered up with another church or a couple other churches, then we'd be able to establish this work there. And so they're looking at pairing those resources to get that church up and going. Similarly, this person needs to be high entrepreneur and be willing to facilitate the conversations necessary to exist between those churches that are wanting to partner together and figuring out how to navigate and make sure everybody stays at peace in that process. The other one's kind of establishing an establishing movement that seems to be growing in this season when it comes to church planting is the micro movement. A lot of different conversations, a lot of different titles that this has been called over the years. It could be cell group, house church, micro church, simple church, model. In order to do this well, you've got to be a trainer and a delegator and a person that really is relationally driven. And so naturally the gift mix is, again, the trainer delegator. Now, when it comes to church planting momentum, this tends to be a slower model. It's just important to know that. It's not a right or wrong. You just need to know if this is the desire of your heart to kind of, hey, we're going to start in our home, and when it gets to a certain number, we're going to split it up, and now we're going to have 2 groups, the idea of going to 4 groups, and continue to expand that. There are a few places that's working here in the United States. I would say a lot of the ground has been hard work to get this up and going, and partly it's a little bit, you're fighting against the American culture. We do see that this seems to be working really well among ethnic groups, specifically refugee groups, the diaspora, where you have maybe a large conglomerate of, say, Somalians that live in this city center. And so because the other societies tend to be a little bit more familial and relationally driven than Americans, this is a good way to work. One of the things that you do fight against when it comes to American culture and this micro movement is that people don't necessarily look at their homes as a gathering point. Homes have moved to being more of a retreat center where people want to retreat from their day's work, their day stresses. And so the idea of bringing in a bunch of people from outside into our church, into our home to gather as a church is just a cultural phenomenon that you need to know you're going to have to fight against. But is it doable? Absolutely. But again, don't have the idea of, hey, we want to just meet in one small group that meets in our house, but the perspective needs to be a movement of churches being established. And then lastly would be what I would dub kind of the catalyzing church planting movement, where it's the focus is about sparking a church planting movement. The gift set, the gift mix that works really well with this is the apostolic or multi-gifted leader. Where they have the bandwidth and the vision, the futuristic thinking to think through how do we establish this network of churches that continues to plant more churches. And we want to really geographically saturate an entire area of a state or maybe even the state itself. So that gives you kind of a basic understanding of some of the different models that exist out there, what the gift set and the gift mix. Now, once you've established kind of go, hey, I think this is us. This is what seems that God has put around us in order for us to be successful. Now the idea is we need to begin to focus in on networking with other individuals and building relationships in that community. So let me walk you through 10 rules for networking. Now, when it comes to these specific rules, what you want to do is they're all important. So number one, as you step into a brand new community, you've got to just trust in God's provision. I would encourage you to spend time walking the community, walking around business centers, and just praying that God would open up specific doors and opportunities for you to be able to engage people in talking about the gospel, talking about this new work, and look for people that are postured in a positive sense towards this new work. Number two, you want to step into any type of community taking the posture of a servant. Recognizing, hey, I'm here to serve the community. I'm not here to take something from the community. Communities will respond much more positively towards you when they realize you're there to help the community and you want to help to continue the health of building the health and the foundation in that community as well. So you want to take the posture of a servant. And part of this is recognizing, believe it or not, God's already been at work in that community before you got there. And there are pastors that have been in that community for a long time. You may come with a different approach and some more different creative ideas, innovation when it comes to maybe what they're doing, but don't neglect the work that they've been doing over years and sometimes decades of serving that community. And you could do a lot for yourself to just spend some time and hear from them how the community operates, what success they've been seeing, what their challenges are, what their prayers are for that community over the last years or decades. Number three, which requires you to be an effective listener. Just spend time talking, but spend time listening. Try to understand, why does this community operate the way that they do? What are the things that seem to be oppressing them when it comes to spiritual things? And what are the storylines of that community? Every community has a different storyline. And the more that you can become in touch with that the more effective it will help you actually in establishing this new work. Number four, you got to be an initiator. Nobody's going to make you do this. Nobody's going to make you walk the street and begin to get to know people. One of the things that I encourage any time I'm coaching a church planter is establish a goal of how many conversations you need to have per week in order to build momentum towards creating a launch team and so forth. Church planters, you need to think of, and we'll talk in more detail later in this conversation, you need to think of aiming for maybe around 40 adults in order to establish this new work and before you actually have a grand opening. So then you begin to reverse engineer it. What if we had one out of every 10 conversations somebody joins the launch team, or maybe 2 out of every 10 conversations? How many conversations do you need to have in order to get to 40 adults that are willing to establish this? This is going to require, again, to be an initiator. I would walk the streets, take the opportunity, go in, introduce yourself to every single business owner, every single manager, restaurant manager that you possibly can, and just walk in and say, hey, I want to introduce myself. My name is Lee. We're going to be starting a church right down the street, let's say in the movie theater. And I just wanted to come in, get to know a little bit about you, about your business. Is there anything specifically I can be praying for you right now or any of your team? Now, you want to take those opportunities very seriously. I always recorded those things on my phone. I'd write their name down so I didn't forget their name, and then I take their prayer request, and that will help you make a memorable first impression. What I mean by that is then come back a month later and say, hey, Joe, it was great meeting you last month. I just wanted to see, I've been praying for you about these things. How have things been going? Nobody does that. Nobody, number one, walks into a business, gets to know a business owner and asks them what they can pray for. But nobody actually tends to follow up with that to also see how it's going. And so people will automatically remember that moment and that conversation, and they will pair your church with you as being somebody that really cares about the community and cared about them personally. Now, they may never actually step in the doors of your church, but what you'll begin to see is they will begin to refer people to you because of the positive interaction that they've had. They know people, and they know people are going through different life struggles and life challenges. And so in those moments, they may go, well, you know what? You really should go check out this church. I met the pastor. The pastor's fantastic. You need to go there. Believe it or not, one time when we were in Arizona, I did this and met a ton of different business owners. 3 years later, after having that conversation, one of the business owners walked into our church and said, I never forgot that conversation. My family and I are here for the first time because we really need to be established in the local church. And it birthed a great friendship. And he owned a local pizza restaurant. And my family and I, we got to enjoy free pizza even after that. So that was a perk of the job. But go after figuring out a way to make memorable first impressions after you take the initiative. Number 6, you want to take every referral seriously. So as you're interacting with people, if they do share prayer requests, take that very seriously. Pray for those, respond, come back, check in. But at the same time, be willing to ask, hey, do you know anybody else that I should be having this conversation with? Anybody else that what we do as a church that would be helpful to? And you want to take those referrals very seriously and follow up and maybe even take the moment to introduce yourself or ask them to help introduce you to that person. Try something new. I believe that some of the best ideas haven't been done yet. And so be creative when it comes to how you can make a first impression, get to know people, and help establish what you're doing in that community. I know when we were meeting at the movie theater, when we were getting ready to do the grand open, we worked out a partnership with the movie theater where we actually gave away free movie tickets, and we asked our permission to be able to do that. And then we had a bunch of people dress up, and we went out and rented really high quality costumes, but we dressed up as different high end movie characters. So we had like Snow White, we had Superman, we had Darth Vader, I think we had Napoleon Dynamite, and we just stood out on the biggest night. So we'd stay out there on Friday night and Saturday night interacting with people. We'd do movie trivia, and if you got the movie trivia right, we'd give you a free movie ticket. But as people would gather around for those moments, we had people that would kind of walk around and they give a card and just saying, hey, I want to invite you to come to our grand opening. If there's anything we can do for you, let us know. There's an email address right there. And just those little things created ripple effects that helped to build and establish a healthy relational perspective of who we are and what we were doing in the community. Figure out ways to develop partnerships. Because there's needs, most likely there are already groups of people that are doing missional activities, both church related and even non-faith related. Figure out ways in which you could partner with some of those things. For instance, if there's a local food bank, just partner with that food bank versus trying to create your own food bank. I know one of our biggest outreach events that we ever did was in partnership with a non-faith-based food bank in our community. And by the time we were done with the month of kind of push towards food, it ended up being the largest food donation that food bank had ever received in any time of their history. And as a result, the entire board came to our Christmas Eve services and had the opportunity to hear the gospel. And it just built a great friendship for years to come when it came to local ministry opportunities in that community. So figure out ways to partner with what God already has established and what God is already doing in that community. Don't think you have to do it all yourself. Number 9, you want to keep accurate records. So again, when you interact with people, get to know a local partnership or a local mission opportunity, make sure you write those things down so you don't forget those contacts. And then lastly, always take moments to just follow up. Even if it's a quick text or an email, or you walk in person, drop off a 12-pack of Coke or bring in a box of donuts, just say, hey, I was thinking about you today. Hope you guys are doing well. Praying for you. Let me know if there's anything more specific I can do. And over time, you'll find that this helps really establish really incredible relationships and a positive vibe towards who you are as a church. Now, knowing that those are kind of the 10 rules of networking, here's 5 hats or 5 roles you could think about it that every church planter needs to be willing to wear as you walk in and you begin to connect with your community. Number 1, you need to see yourself as an intercessor. Just as Jesus stepped into our mess and he worked to reconcile and redeem our relationship with God, our Creator, he interceded on our behalf. We too are moving into communities as in a form of intercession. And so spend time praying for that community, spend time interceding on God on their behalf between them and God. Take time to intercede by just looking for open doors to be able to share the gospel. Number 2, you want to wear the hat of a learner. Take the posture, I'm here to learn. I want to know about our community. Why do people do what they do? Why do they commute the directions that they, where they eat, why they eat there? Who are the power brokers, the peacemakers within that community? Take time to just learn the established ways of how that community continues to operate. Small towns have a way in which they do things, for instance. And it may take a long time to break into those communities just because you're an outsider. And so figure those things out. How do I break in? For me, one of the things that we did here locally was I just began to coach local sports. So I coached local football, I've coached basketball, I've coached baseball. Currently, I'm coaching swimming. And those things just provide incredible opportunities to get to know a lot of families, a lot of parents, and to build trust very quickly. Number 3, again, we talked about this just previously, but you're wearing the hat of a servant. You're there to serve. You're not there to take anything, but figure out where the needs in that community are. Where there's needs, that is where your mission exists. Sometimes it may be at the local high school. I know for us, we began to build trust with the local high school football program, and the coach shared with me, I just asked him and say, hey, what's one of the biggest needs you had? He goes, we need a golf cart. And I remember going, man, I think we can take care of that. And we were able to end up delivering a custom-made golf cart to him unannounced. He had no idea, complete surprise that this was coming. And what it did was it really helped win over not only the coach, but the entire program, the parents of the program, and the school officials that they saw us as really a church that was there to serve the community. Which brings number 4, they then begin to see us as a friend or ally, that somebody they could lean upon. When they needed something, or they had a student that was hurting, or a family that was going through a hard time, we became kind of their go-to group to reach out to and go, hey, would you be willing to help this? And that brings us to number 5, the last one. I think this is the most important. You're a storyteller. It doesn't matter how much time you spend in the community, what you learn about the community, how you serve the community, if you don't take time to tell the story of the gospel. And so in the middle of these conversations, as you're establishing trust in a community, as you're networking in that community, don't forget why you're really there. You're there because Jesus matters to them and they matter to Jesus. And so you want to take every opportunity you can to share the story of the gospel, why Jesus came, what Jesus did, what it means to respond to him in faith. Pastors, you can do this. And I'm excited to hear the stories that are going to come out of your hard work in tilling the ground, getting to know people, and taking the initiative.